Don't make a scene, that's all there is to it. Understand? With that single, cutting remark from my half-sister Kelly, all the joy and anticipation I'd been holding on to shattered in an instant. She had opened the door to my villa just a crack, peering out through the narrow gap with eyes as cold and empty as if she were looking at a pebble on the side of the road. Ironically, the state-of-the-art security chain I'd had installed for this very day, by a professional no less, now hung between us, protecting her. Understand what? Kelly, this isn't funny. Stop joking and open the door. It's snowing and my hands are full of luggage. I tried desperately to keep my voice from trembling. This villa, my castle in the sky, was something I'd built with the profits I'd earned from endless days and sleepless nights, tracking the markets, investing every gain from crypto and stocks into this dream. It's not a joke. I mean it, Kelly said, spitting out the words like poison. And then from behind the door came the sound of raucous laughter. My stepmother Diane and my other sister Hannah, and among them my father's gentle voice laughing along. So, they're all here already, huh? Kelly said nothing. Her blank face told me everything. It was obvious to her. Then why? You know how much I prepared for this day. The Wagyu roast beef, the Christmas cake from that famous pâtissier, everything. Kelly cut me off, and for the first time, her lips twisted ever so slightly. It was a smile, a hideous one, mingling pity and contempt. Thank you, really, for all the effort, and for paying for everything. We truly appreciate it. And then she said the words I'll never forget. I'm sorry, but this Christmas, we just want to spend it with our real family. The heavy door slammed shut. A sharp metallic click followed. Empty. That word didn't even begin to describe the dark wave rising from the pit of my stomach. Once again, was I only the one who pays? Memories from years ago replayed vividly in my mind, as if it had all happened yesterday. I remembered the day I ran into the living room, clutching my college acceptance letter. Dad, I did it! I got into my first choice university. My father's face lit up for a brief second, but when he glanced at Diane sitting beside him, his smile faded. That's wonderful, Lucy. But you know we've also got Kelly and Hannah, paying tuition for 3 private universities at once. It's tough, honestly. A few weeks later, he called me into his study and handed me a brochure. It was a guide for scholarship programs. You're smart. I'm sure you'll qualify. Why not try going to college on your own? It'll be a valuable experience. I believed his words. I studied like my life depended on it, passed the interviews, and earned the scholarship. But one day, just before graduation, I overheard my father and Diane talking. We finally finished paying off Kelly and Hannah's tuition. Honestly, it's true what they say. Girls are expensive. Yeah, thank goodness Lucy got that scholarship. That really helped us out. That was the moment I realized. I was the only one who had paid for her own education. While my sisters lived comfortably under our parents' care, I'd been left to carry the burden alone. My so-called valuable experience was nothing but a sacrifice made for them. Something inside me snapped. The sadness hardened into a cold, steel-like rage. Slowly, I took my phone out of my pocket. Without hesitation, I tapped the 3 digits on the screen. Emergency services. Police, fire, or medical? A calm operator's voice answered on the other end. I steadied my voice and spoke clearly. Police. There are several people unlawfully occupying my property, and they've locked the rightful owner. Me. Outside. The operator asked for my name, address, and the details of the situation in an official tone. I simply stated the facts as they were. They were no longer my family. Just trespassers. Do you have any proof of ownership? Yes, all the property documents, the electronic deed, and the purchase contract are stored on this smartphone. The operator listened, then replied briskly, Understood. We'll dispatch officers immediately. Please stay in your vehicle and keep yourself safe. The line went dead. I sank deep into the driver's seat of my car, staring blankly through the windshield at the snow falling harder and harder beyond the glass. On the dashboard sat a small Santa Claus figurine. My late mother had given it to me when I was a child. Every Christmas, we would display it together, a tiny, private tradition shared only between us. After Diane moved in, Santa stopped appearing in the living room. It was pushed aside, forgotten in a corner of my bedroom. And now that little figure was all I had left of my real family. I didn't even feel sadness anymore. How long had it been? Then, cutting through the muffled silence, came the sound of a siren, growing louder as it climbed the snowy road. Through the blur of white, I saw a police car slowly but firmly making its way up the drive. It stopped behind my vehicle. 2 officers stepped out, both broad-shouldered, their presence solid and reassuring. "You're Lucy, the one who was reported, correct? We received your report and were briefed in the car," said the older officer, his tone stern but not unkind. "First, we'll need to confirm ownership." I handed him my phone. The younger officer carefully scanned my ID and the digital deed with his verification device. "Confirmed? The property belongs to the caller." The older officer nodded gravely, turning his gaze toward the tightly shut front door. "This isn't a domestic dispute. It's a clear criminal case. We'll handle it from here." Knock, knock, knock. "Police, open the door." Silence. The laughter that had filled the house moments ago vanished completely. Then the door opened. Just a sliver, still chained. The man who appeared was Chris, Kelly's fiancé. His face froze when he saw the 2 officers standing outside. "Police, what's going on?" "The owner, Lucy, has filed a report. You are currently trespassing on her property. Everyone inside is to come out immediately." The officer's voice was calm, procedural, devoid of emotion, but each word drained the color from Chris's face. Moments later, Diane appeared from the living room, alarmed by the commotion. "What? Police?" "Chris, what is this about?" Her anger faltered the instant she saw the uniforms. "Oh, officers, has something happened? My goodness, out here in this weather, you're working so hard." She smiled sweetly, pretending innocence, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Ma'am, drop the act," the older officer said flatly, slicing through her performance. "It's already been confirmed that you and the others locked the rightful owner out of her own home. This constitutes unlawful entry and occupation of private property." "A crime," Diane's voice cracked. "Don't be ridiculous. This is our daughter's house. What's wrong with spending Christmas as a family?" That was when I stepped forward from behind the officers. I met Diane's eyes head on. "Your daughters are Kelly and Hannah, aren't they? You told me just minutes ago that I'm not part of your real family and you threw me out." At my appearance, Diane gasped and her face flushing crimson. "Lucy, how could you do this? Bringing the police into a family matter? Do you want to disgrace us?" "The only ones disgracing this family are you," I said, cutting across her words, firmly for the first time in my life. "This is my house, and you are nothing but intruders who broke in without my permission." At my first ever rebuttal, Diane was momentarily lost for words. Then, as if remembering her role, she collapsed dramatically into my father's arms, sobbing like a tragic heroine finally undone. "Honey, listen, Lucy's treating us like criminals." My father looked from me to the officers, his face tight with discomfort. Then came the same tired line he'd used my whole life. "Officers, please. This is just a misunderstanding, a small family issue. I'm sure we can resolve it peacefully if we talk." As I looked at him, another memory, buried deep but still burning, rose to the surface once more. When I was in high school, Kelly once framed me for breaking a window that belonged to the school. Of course, I was innocent. But when my father was called to the school, he gave me no chance to defend myself. Out of regard for Diane and Kelly, he simply apologized to my homeroom teacher on my behalf. "It was all my daughter's carelessness. I'm very sorry." On the way home, he turned to me and said, "Lucy, don't make things worse. If you just endure it, everything will stay peaceful." My father had always cared more about keeping the peace than telling the truth. And the one who paid the price for that peace was always me. "Sir?" The older police officer cut through my father's excuses, his tone cold and final. "I'm afraid this can't be dismissed as a misunderstanding. According to our verification, ownership of this property lies entirely with Lucy. None of you have the right to remain here, not for a single second, without her permission." Then, in a voice that carried clearly to everyone present, he delivered his final warning. "This is an official eviction order under the law. You have 5 minutes to gather your belongings and vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in immediate arrest for unlawful entry and refusal to leave private property. The word arrest struck the air like a blade, sharp and undeniable. The fiancé of my sisters turned pale and stumbled backward a few steps. It was written all over their faces. They wanted nothing more than to cut ties with this ridiculous family and disappear. Hannah crumpled to the floor, sobbing like a child. Only Diane still refused to accept reality, her mouth twisting as she tried to shout something back. But when the younger officer rested his hand on his holster and took a silent step forward, she understood. The perfect Christmas she had planned was collapsing in the worst possible way. The officer's deadline, 5 minutes, hung over them like the timer of some cruel game. Gone was their arrogance. They retreated quietly into the house. I stood there, arms folded, watching in silence. There was no anger left in me, no sadness, only emptiness and a cold, clear contempt. Inside, I could hear them moving about hastily. The living room I had decorated so carefully glowed with warmth, the fir tree glittering with golden lights, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, filling the room with gentle light. Beneath the tree was a small mountain of gifts, each one I had chosen over the past weeks while thinking tenderly of their faces. Now they hurried past them without a glance. Before 5 minutes had passed, they reappeared at the door with only the bare minimum of luggage in hand. Hannah, her eyes red and swollen, shot me a brief glare before quickly looking away and fleeing to her car with her fiancé. Kelly and Chris followed. As she passed me, Kelly muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll regret this." But there was no power left in her voice. Finally, my father and Diane emerged. Diane's face was twisted with hatred, her lips murmuring curses under her breath, like some old witch casting spells. My father stopped in front of me, his shoulders sagging. "Lucy, I'm sorry, I never meant for it to turn out like this." His voice was faint, almost a whisper, but his words didn't reach me at all. "Dad, you've always been like this." My voice surprised even me, calm, level, almost detached. At my words, my father suddenly looked up, but he couldn't say a thing. Biting his lip in frustration, he let Diane take his arm and walked heavily toward their car. One by one, the 3 cars drove away, followed closely by the patrol car. I stood there, watching in silence until the red taillights vanished into the dark forest. Then, at last, stillness returned. I stepped slowly into my house, my fortress. Warm air wrapped around my frozen body. I took off my coat and began to walk through the rooms, ready to start cleaning up. As I walked through the living room, my eyes caught something wedged between the sofa cushions, a familiar smartphone. It belonged to Diane. She must have left in such a panic that she'd forgotten the one thing she treasured almost as much as her own life. Conveniently, it wasn't locked. I felt no guilt, no hesitation. Like a detective examining evidence, I opened her messaging app. And there it was, an abyss of text messages revealing a truth far uglier than I could have imagined. It was a group chat among Diane and her neighborhood friends. The conversation began the very night I had told my family about purchasing this villa. "Everyone, you won't believe it. That girl, Lucy, bragged about buying a huge mountain villa with her stock market windfall. It's absurd." "Oh, right, she's your stepdaughter, isn't she, Diane?" "Exactly. And the audacity. She says she's hosting Christmas there this year. Of course, she's paying for everything herself. I suppose she just wants to show off. Well, I'll play along for appearance's sake." My hand trembled with fury as I scrolled. To her friends, she had painted me as the nouveau riche, uncultured girl who throws money around to impress, while casting herself as the gracious, long-suffering mother indulging a foolish child. Then I reached the final message, sent just hours before tonight's disaster. "We're heading to the villa now. Before Lucy arrives, of course. Once she's done preparing and paying for everything, I'll politely send her away. We deserve a real family Christmas without any outsiders. Merry Christmas, everyone." That was the truth. I locked the screen and placed the phone on the table. It wasn't just a forgotten possession. It was proof, undeniable evidence of their betrayal. I would never again let them trample on my life or my dignity. Quietly, but with absolute resolve, I made a vow. I will not let this house become a cursed place, tainted by their filthy memories. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of the one person I could trust completely. "Hello, Lucy. Merry Christmas. How's the party going?" It was Allison, her voice bright and warm like sunlight through clouds. The moment I heard her, the tension inside me finally snapped, and I allowed myself to exhale. Allison, I'm just exhausted. She must have sensed everything. Her tone changed instantly. Serious, grounded. I told her everything. Every detail, every word, without leaving a single thing out. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, in a voice trembling with controlled anger, she said, I see. I'm coming over, right now. Not alone. Steve, Jenny, and Paul are with me. We're your real family, Lucy. We'll turn this awful Christmas into the best night of your life. Wait for us. Before I could reply, she hung up. Her words, fierce and unwavering, lit a small, precious flame inside my frozen heart. With a firm, all right, I gathered myself and stood up. To prepare for their arrival, I began by erasing every trace of their presence. Every hateful remnant left behind in the living room. Every glass they had used went straight into a trash bag. I stripped the tablecloth and replaced it with a new one. Then I turned to the fireplace. 7 Christmas stockings hung above it. I took down 6 of them, leaving only my own, and threw the rest into the fire without hesitation. The red felt curled and blackened as the flames devoured it. I watched in silence. It was a ritual of farewell, my final goodbye to the person I used to be. 2 hours later, headlights cut through the falling snow, climbing the hill toward the villa. When I opened the front door wide, I saw Allison, Steve, Jenny, and Paul standing there, their faces worried but glowing with warmth. Lucy. Everyone. We said nothing more. We just held each other tightly. Soon, the table was filled with food and wine they had brought, and the house that had been dead silent only hours ago was alive again, filled with laughter, light, and music. The real Christmas had finally begun. It's been a rough night, but here's to Lucy, and to the start of her new life. Cheers! Cheers! I raised my glass, surrounded by the warmth of my friends' laughter, and felt gratitude swell in my chest. The events of the day had stripped me of a false family. But in return, they had shown me what true friendship really meant. When the party had settled a little, I called Allison and Steve, who worked at a law firm, into the study. On the table between us, I placed Diane's smartphone. The evidence. I want you to see this. I opened the group chat and showed them the messages, the sickening exchanges that had mocked and deceived me. Steve read through them slowly, his calm demeanor unbroken, though a deep frown furrowed his brow. When he finally looked up, his voice carried the weight of his profession. Lucy, this is worse than you think, especially this group chat. It's damning. In the right hands, this could destroy Diane's social credibility entirely. Allison leaned forward, eyes wide. What do you mean? You're not planning to leak this online, are you? Steve shook his head firmly. No, that's not our way. What we'll do must be smart, precise, and, above all, legal. Lucy, you're not seeking revenge. What you want is justice. To make them face the weight of their actions within the bounds of the law. Am I right? I nodded firmly. Exactly. I don't want to stoop to their level, but I'm done being silent. Steve's plan was meticulous. First, he would preserve every line of the chat, especially the messages where Diane ridiculed me and detailed her plan. They would be archived as legally valid evidence. Next, we would calculate every cost from the Christmas party down to the last cent. Food, decorations, transportation, even the damaged property. Then, a formal letter of demand for compensation would be sent to my father and Diane by certified mail, accompanied by the report and the selected chat excerpts. They'll probably ignore it, or try to negotiate the amount down. When Steve finished his sentence, his lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. That's when we play our next card, the chat itself. If they refuse to settle, we'll inform the appropriate authorities, your father's company's compliance office and the board of Diane's social association. Not a threat, just the truth presented where it belongs. It was not a violent threat. It was simply the exercise of a rightful act, reporting facts as facts to the proper authorities. For someone like Diane, who prized reputation above all, it would be worse than any prison sentence. So, Lucy, what do you say? Steve asked me. This is the strategy I propose for your fight. Without a moment's doubt, I met his gaze. Do it, exactly as you said. A few days after Christmas, the certified letter was sent from Steve's office, addressed jointly to my father and Diane. Inside were a detailed summary of the incident, a formal claim for damages down to the last item, and an attachment containing carefully selected excerpts from the chat. Just enough to show the truth. They were given 7 days to respond. During that week, I quietly put my affairs in order, with my friend's help. The villa was handed over to a reputable real estate firm, listed as a luxury rental for overseas clients. There was no longer any need for that place to be a place of family memories. When the 7 days passed, I found dozens of missed calls and voicemails from my father. His voice was trembling, drained of its usual authority. "Lucy, please, just talk to me. That letter, what's going on? Diane's beside herself." I listened to the message until the end, my heart cold and still. Then, without calling back, I dialed Steve. A few days later, I met them both again, my father and Diane, in a quiet conference room at Steve's firm. It had only been a few weeks since Christmas, yet they looked unrecognizable. Diane, still wrapped in her designer coat and jewelry, looked like a ghost beneath the paint. Her complexion ashen, dark shadows etched under her eyes. Her pride must have already been shattered. "Then, may I have your answer?" Steve's voice was calm, professional, mercilessly steady. My father trembled as he reached into his bag and took out an envelope. "The full amount you requested is here." But Diane cut him off, her voice sharp and desperate. "Wait. Before you pay, let me say something, Lucy. Are you blackmailing us? If you make those messages public, you'll destroy yourself too. Don't you see that?" Steve didn't so much as blink. "You misunderstand, ma'am. There is no blackmail here. We are simply informing you of the legal options available to us should you refuse a legitimate claim. For example, your husband's company is publicly listed, isn't it? I wonder how shareholders might react if they learned that the family of a corporate executive was engaged in conduct that borders on harassment and fraud." At those words, my father gasped, and Diane's face turned pale as she fell silent. Everything was finally over. My father placed the envelope on the table with a trembling hand and apologized deeply. Diane followed suit, stiff and silent. I stood up without ever looking at them. At the door, I turned only once, just enough to whisper the last word I would ever say to them. "Goodbye." From the law office, I went straight to a phone shop. Without hesitation, I changed my number, the same number I'd had for over a decade. My father, Diane, and my sisters, none of them exist in my life anymore. Cutting off all means of contact was the final ritual to bid farewell to my former self. Days later, Steve forwarded me a signed document from my father and Diane, a notarized statement confirming full payment of damages and a legally binding promise never to contact me again. Just one piece of paper. And yet it felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. By the time winter gave way to spring, my life had found its new rhythm. The villa, once a monument to false family unity, was now leased long-term to an executive from an overseas tech firm. It had become what it was always meant to be, a solid foundation for my future, not a prison for my past. One evening, as I returned home from work, I noticed a familiar figure standing by the gate of my apartment. Slumped, smaller than I remembered. It was my father. "Lucy." His voice was barely a whisper. We sat in a quiet cafe nearby. He clasped his hands on the table and stared down at them for a long time, before finally looking up, tears glistening in his tired eyes. "I'm so sorry for everything. That day, I should have protected you. I failed you as a father." I looked at him, my tone level, distant. "Why now?" At my cold question, my father weakly shook his head. It was all because of my weakness. I was afraid to stand up to Diane. But that day, when I lost you, I finally realized what it was I should have been protecting all along. I listened to my father's words in silence. "I won't ask you to forgive me, but please believe this. I truly regret what I've done." After a long pause, I finally spoke. "I'll accept your apology, but forgiveness is another matter entirely. And there's one absolute condition." I met his eyes and said, "From now on, if you still wish to have any relationship with me, it will be only when you're alone. I want nothing more to do with Diane or your so-called real family." Don't even speak their names in front of me again. That was the new boundary I drew, for the sake of my own life. My father nodded sorrowfully but firmly. After leaving the cafe, I walked home alone, and as I did, I began to truly feel the weight of what I had gained. No longer did I have to endure for anyone else's sake. Who to forgive and who to let go. Every rule in my life was now mine to decide. I had lost many things, yes, but in exchange, I had gained the freedom to take control of my own life, a freedom that shone with a brilliance beyond anything I had ever known. My true life was beginning, right here, right now.